Hi. Okay, so we're at the last part of the reading, part 7 on page 45 of our text. You ready? This is the concluding thoughts section, part 7 on page 45. I know you can't really see it. There we go. Yeah, 45. Okay. Concluding thoughts. In East St. Louis, as in every city that I visit, I am forced to ask myself if what I see may be atypical. One would think that this might be the case in East St. Louis, but it would not be the truth. At Lansdowne Junior High in the St. Louis, as the St. Louis Sun reports, there are scores of window frames without glass, like sockets without eyes. Hallways in many schools are dark, and light bulbs missing or burnt out. One walks into a school, and a member of the city's Board of Education notes, and you can smell the urinals 100 feet away. A teacher at an elementary school in East St. Louis has only one full color workbook for her class. She photocopies workbook pages for her students, but the copies can't be made in color, and the lessons call for color recognition by the children. A history teacher at the Martin Luther King School has 110 students in 4 classes, but only 26 books. Some of the books are missing the first 100 pages. Each year, Solomon observes of East St. Louis High, there is one more toilet that doesn't flush, one more drinking fountain that doesn't work, one more classroom without texts. Certain classrooms are so cold in the winter that the students have to wear their coats to class, while children in other classrooms swelter in suffocating heat that cannot be turned down. Critics in the press routinely note that education spending in the district is a trifle more than in surrounding districts. They also note that public schools in East St. Louis represent the largest source of paid employment in the city. Okay, we're at the top of page 46. And this point is often used to argue that the schools are overstaffed. The implication of both statements is that East St. Louis spends excessively on education. One could as easily conclude, however, that the conditions of existence here call for an even larger school expenditures to draw and to retain more gifted staff and to offer all those extra services so desperately needed in a poor community. What such critics also fail to note, as Solomon and Principal Sam Morgan have observed, is that the crumbling infrastructure uses a great deal more of per pupil budget than would be the case in districts with updated buildings that cost less to operate. Critics also willfully ignore the health conditions and the psychological disarray of children growing up in burnt-out housing, playing on contaminated land, and walking past acres of smoldering garbage on their way to school. They also ignore the vast expense entailed in trying to make up for the debilitated skills of many parents who were prior victims of these segregated schools or of Mississippi, in which many of the other older residents of East St. Louis led their early lives. In view of the extraordinary miseries of life for children in the district, East St. Louis should be spending far more than is spent in wealthy suburbs. As things stand, the city spends approximately half as much each year on every pupil as the state's top spending districts. All right, paragraph 7 at the bottom of page 46. It is also forgotten that dramatic cuts in personnel within the East St. Louis schools, for example, of 250 teachers and 250 non-professional employees, as demanded recently by state officials, would propel 500 families with perhaps 2,000 children and dependents to the welfare lists and deny the city the stability afforded by a good chunk of its rapidly diminished lower middle class. Nothing in short, that the East St. Louis School Board does within the context of its penury can benefit one interest in the city without damaging others. That was a tough paragraph. That's all I want to say. That was a tough paragraph, and there's a lot of new words in there for me. Paragraph 8. It is accurate to note that certain of the choices and priorities established by the East St. Louis School Board do at times strike an observer as misguided, and state politicians are not hesitant to emphasize this point. The mayor of the city, for many years, a controversial young man named Carl Officer, was frequently attacked by the same critics for what sometimes was alleged to be his lack of priority and far-sighted planning. There may have been some real truths to these charges, but the diligence of critics in observing the supposed irregularities of his behavior stands in stunning contrast to their virtual refusal to address the governing realities of the destitution and near total segregation and the willingness of private industry to flee a population it once courted and enticed to East St. Louis, but now finds expendable. In very few cases, in discussing the immiseration, that's a word I don't know, so I'm going to look that one up in a minute, of this city, do Illinois officials openly address the central fact, the basic evil of its racial isolation. With more efficient local governance, East St. Louis might become a better managed ghetto, a less ravaged racial settlement, but the soil would remain contaminated and the schools would still resemble relics of the South post-Reconstruction. They might be a trifle cleaner and they might perhaps provide their children with a dozen more computers or typewriters, better stoves for cooking classes, or a better shop for training future gas station mechanics. But the children would still be poisoned in their bodies and disfigured in their spirits. Paragraph 10. Now and then the possibility is raised by somebody in East St. Louis that the state may someday try to end this isolation of the city as an all-black entity. This is something, however, that no one with power in the state has ever contemplated. Certainly, no one in government proposes busing 16,000 children from this city to nearby schools of Bellevue, Fairview Heights, or Collinsville. And no one intends to force these towns to open up their neighborhoods to racially segregated and low-income housing. So there is, in fact, no exit for these children. East St. Louis will likely be left just as it is for a good many years to come, a scar of sorts, an ugly metaphor of filth and overspill and chemical effusions, a place for blacks to live and die within, a place for other people to avoid when they are heading for St. Louis. All right. That last section really reminded me a lot of all the different societalisms that we've been talking about in class. And so one of your assignments, one of your things that you need to do is identify different societalisms within this packet. And so I've seen a lot of stuff about environmental racism. I've seen a lot of classism. I've seen a lot of general racism towards Black people even in throughout this. So there's a lot of examples of those societalisms contained right in here. All right, we have made it through the reading. Congratulations, I'm so proud of you. Thank you for joining me as we read through this document together. See you in class.